to the Yahowah blog. My name is Craig Wynn, and I will be your host. This is the fourth program that we have done now on the second psalm, or Mizmowr. The readings that we're going to share with you are from a book that I wrote probably a decade ago, but have updated as recently as a few months ago, called Coming Home. There are 3 volumes of Coming Home that are currently published, with a 4th currently underway that I am writing as we continue to pursue this media outreach. Each of the Coming Home volumes focuses on Dod's Mizmowr, his psalms. And this first one is entitled Kol, a voice. The second is about the Messiah. And so each of them are specific to an aspect of Dod's life. And he is by far the most interesting man in the world. Unbeknown to everyone until I not only discovered it, but began openly sharing it, what I think is the greatest discovery in human history, is that Dod, who is commonly known as David, his name Dod means beloved, is the chosen one of Yahweh. He is our shepherd. He is the former Malach, king of Israel. He is the returning Malach of the universe. Dod is the Messiah. The false messiahs of Judaism and Christianity are counterfeits of Dod. He was anointed by Yahweh 3 times because he will have lived 3 lives by the time that he returns on Kippurim in year 6,000 Yah. But beyond being the Messiah, Dod is also the Son of God. He is the only person that God says, he is my son and I am his father. And Yahweh conveys this 3 times to us. In addition, Dod did something that is even more impressive, even more worthy of our appreciation. Dod in his first life was able to ascertain that it was appropriate for him to volunteer to serve as the Pesach Gael, the Passover lamb, and to carry our guilt with him into Sheol, hell, the black hole of separation from Yahweh, to deposit our guilt there so it would never be seen again, so that we appear perfect in God's eyes. And then he fulfilled Bikurim as Yahweh's firstborn the following day, all in year 4,000 Yah, 33 CE. He not only volunteered for his case for doing so was so compelling, Yahweh agreed with him and accepted his offer. So Dod, David, is the person who was counterfeited not only by Christianity to create this mythical person named Jesus Christ, a man God who has no actual existence, never tread a footstep on earth. All a crude counterfeit of Dod, but also that star that is wrongly attributed to David that is on the Israeli flag is actually the star of Bar Kokhba, the son of a star, that's what his name means, that was falsely foisted on Israel by the founder of rabbinical Judaism, Akiba. And so Bar Kokhba is also a crude counterfeit of Dod. I won't even go into Islam because there isn't enough credibility there to even justify the waste of time. But understand, the person we're talking about is, according to God, who ought to know, the Son of God, his firstborn, his chosen one, his anointed Messiah, our shepherd, our king. And not only that, he is the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim to afford us all 5 benefits of the covenant, which are to become immortal, to be perfected, to be adopted into Yahweh's covenant family, and to be enriched and empowered by God. All of these things Yahweh made possible in cooperation with his son, the Messiah, Dowd. The combination of these things serve as the greatest discovery in human history because they are the most valuable. They explain how any of us and all of us can approach Yahweh, how we can enter heaven, how we can live forever, how we can be better than saved. We can appear perfect in God's eyes and become part of his family and inherit all that is his to give. And there is nothing that pleases our Creator more than acknowledging what his beloved Son has done for us. So that is why we've returned to Coming Home, Volume 1, and are now reviewing the second Mizmowr song. Now, this is the 4th part of this series, so I'm going to repeat what Dowd wrote in the opening lyrics of the second Mizmowr song. It begins with a question, one that I don't think anyone knew the answer to until quite recently when we disclosed it. He asked, "For what reason do noisy and confused throngs of scheming and rebellious Gentiles gather together to conspire in open defiance? Ragash Goyim, do boisterous and disorderly crowds of restless religious, political, and militant ethnicities, estranged from Israel, rise up vehemently to hastily agitate in fellowship with one another, with races attempting to be noticed and to gain attention through their perceived and contrived plots, creating a disturbing commotion as part of an unrestrained cult of worshipers by hurriedly conceiving and promoting clandestine conspiracies." This is just the first sentence in the second Mizmowr. And before we go to the rest of it, I want to make sure you understand this prophecy, because what Dowd was revealing is what we're observing today in the streets of Europe, in the streets of America, and on our college campuses. When Muslims invaded Israel on 10/7/23 and were savages, butchering, torturing little children, gang raping women, and then mutilating these girls, committing acts of terrorism and of mass murder, abducting individuals, the most heinous behavior we have witnessed, and I think even more heinous, although the numbers weren't as great, but the actual crime was more egregious by these Muslims than the Holocaust. And what happened after that is, rather than show remorse, those who are aligned with the religion of Islam, which would include not only Muslims but progressives, celebrated the carnage. They started protesting in the streets. They were loud, they were agitating, they were scheming, they were rebellious. And they gathered in defiance of Jews in Israel, protesting against God's people as if the victims were responsible for the savagery of Muslims. This alliance between progressives, which is a political religion, and Islam, which is a cult of death, is the greatest threat to our planet. And Dowd, as a prophet, was taken forward in time so that he could witness the horrors that we're seeing on our streets, on our college campuses, and across the media. And he's saying, why? How long? For what reason? Ma can be any one of those things. For what reason? For how long? For what is the purpose of this? That these noisy and confused throngs of scheming and rebellious Gentiles gather together to conspire and open defiance. And if you say, hey, there's even progressive Jews that have joined with Muslims in supporting the rape culture, this anti-woman culture, this slavery culture of Islam. Now, I'm not saying that to be pejorative. I know the religion of Islam better than anyone on the planet today. I've done my homework. I've written 5 825-page books using and only using the 5 oldest Islamic scriptural sources. And I have used their words to paint the true picture of Islam from the perspective of the Quran, rearranged chronologically and set into the context of Muhammad's life using the Hadith. And so in those 5 books, you will see Islam as Muhammad spoke it into existence and as his terrorist mandate and his perverted sexuality was the very behavior that Allah said must be emulated by Muslims. I know the religion. I know that its first day was a pledge of war against all mankind. So I speak to you as one who knows Islam and understands it better than anyone. And I also understand why progressives have sought to align themselves with the doctrine that is the most immoral, anti-woman, anti-freedom, anti-intellectual stimulation, anti-truth, and all of human history. And I will continue to do programs on this progressive Islamic alliance that Dowd as a prophet was witnessing here because it is the greatest threat to human existence. They collectively seek to terrorize everyone into submission. They wish to constrain free speech so that only what they want known can be shared. They wish to control everyone. This is what Dowd saw. And he said, how in the world can it be? It's my job to explain it to you. We are partners in this. He then said, the people of these nations who are transformed while massing under an antiquated and unifying religious system, as well as political and conspiratorial systems, choose to plot against and to speak in vain, deluded in their fantasies. The first casualty of both progressives and of Muslims is the truth. The second is life. Freedom is also a casualty. And this is where Europe already is and America is fastly approaching. This is the motivation for Al-Aqsa flood. As Muslims, deceived, murderous, came into Israel and provoked such savagery on 10/7, and will do so again because Israel is lashing out at the symptoms. They're attacking Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and Iran and the Houthis, not knowing that the one common denominator that has been their enemy for 1,400 years, that perpetrated genocide on the Jews of Arabia under Muhammad's leadership, is Islam, as dictated by the Quran and the Hadith. So it says these religious, political, and conspiratorial individuals choose to plot and speak in vain in their deluded fantasies. You know, I watched the faces of those who are captured marching in the very agitated parades of conspiratorial and religious individuals and political individuals throughout the streets of Europe, throughout the streets of America now, and on our college campuses. And what I see is that more of the faces are of progressives. And they're just young and stupid and ignorant and irrational and grossly immoral. And yet they're so full of themselves. They're little triangles. They're little, here I am with, I'm wearing my little scarf and identity of the fakest Indians that so savagely sought to annihilate Jews. It is a degradation of the human experience to the point that for those people, there is no hope. Evidence and reason do not matter. They are lost in the delusions of being a progressive. They react. They go along just as do the religious. Dode was so very right. That's Mizmowr 2:1. The next line reads, the rulers of the earth, the leaders of the earth. Boy, I tell you what, if you look at what's happened with Europe and the progressives and the rape that are taking place, hundreds of thousands of them in the UK alone, it's an abomination. They've invited the Black Plague into their continent, into their homes, and now they're suffering the consequences. And the progressive leadership of Europe are coddling them, are telling anyone who would speak up against Islam's contribution to these hundreds of thousands of rapes, they're slandering. But they're worse than that. They're actually criminalizing free speech in Europe. And this is what progressives are trying to do worldwide. That's why there is a thought police that is part of most social media outreach channels, where they will preclude you from telling the truth. Truth is not even an alibi. They want their mantra and no other. I can read from the Quran and point out just how much of a terrorist Muhammad was and Allah was, and we can be censured from reading from the Quran and exposing what it actually says. That's how bad it has become. But in Europe, particularly in the UK, those who speak out against rape to protect young girls are going to jail, whether rapists or not. This is why progressives are such a threat to human survival. It reads, the rulers of the earth, solely on their own initiative, continually set themselves up. This is what the progressives are doing. They're using Islam to terrorize people into submission. They're using their control over the media to censure all ideas that are contrary to their mantra. They're even using the legal system to jail those who speak out. They have used academia now for 2 generations to indoctrinate young people to the point they no longer think. They're no longer judgmental. They're no longer discerning. They simply react, and their reactions are always wrong. They're on the wrong side of everything. It's such a tragedy. And there's no way to awaken them because, like the religious, with progressives, evidence and reason have no value. Those who govern lay a foundation to conspire and rebel all together against Yahweh and against his Mashiach, anointed. 2:2. These rebellions throughout Europe, throughout the United States, in our city streets, as gangs vociferously take to the streets to chant death to Israel, perpetrating genocide on Jews is their intent, while blaming the Jews falsely for perpetrating genocide. These rebellious voices, both of the progressives coddling them and the Muslims demanding control over the entire earth, are all enemies of Yahweh. Allahu Akbar does not mean God is great. It means Allah is greater. Greater than whom? He wants to be greater than Yahweh. Why? You want to read the story of Allah? Read the 14th chapter of Yashayah. I would encourage you to do so at yadayah.com, because you'll have a wonderful explanation and a complete and accurate translation of what Yashayah revealed. Therein you will find Allah. So they're not only marching against Yahweh, the creator God of the universe, they're also against his Mashiach. You might say, how is that possible? I've already explained it to you. In Christianity, the Mashiach was counterfeited. And because of the counterfeit of Dode in Christianity, it is very difficult for anyone to recognize what the Messiah and Son of God, Dowd, actually did for us on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, because they piled their crap right on top of the truth. Rather than create a religion based upon their own inspiration, Paul, Peter, Luke, Mark, and his other co-conspirators literally corrupted the words of Yahweh to rob his son, Dowd, of his acclaim and his achievements. And then to counter this growth of this new religion growing up in their midst, Rabbi Akiba, the founder of Judaism, rather than announce the truth that they had counterfeited Dowd's reputation, his testimony, his acclaim, his achievements, fought one lie with another and foisted another false Messiah into the mix, which caused the diaspora, which led to the Holocaust. That's the founder of rabbinical Judaism, Akiba. This is how big a mess both Jews are in and the Gentiles who are part of Christianity. And Islam, well, if you want to understand Islam, read Goddamn Religion. It's free at goddamnreligion.org. It's free at yadayah.com. 5 volumes based entirely on the Islamic scriptures. It is irrefutable. And understanding the nature of this curse can save your life and those you love. And you will understand how all 3 of these religions, combined with progressives, are in opposition to the actual Messiah. His name is Dowd. This is Mizmowr, Psalm 2:2. Let us choose of our own volition, he wrote, to break and pull off their bonds, which trap and ensnare, and desire to cast off and throw away from us their twisted and interwoven threads, which bind and immobilize. Religion is a control mechanism. That is what Dowd is saying here. And the 3 religions that robbed him of his acclaim, of his titles, of his dignity, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are all the enemy of both God and our returning King and Messiah. And it is their desire, now in league with progressives, to trap and ensnare everyone, to control everyone, even to control free speech. So what Dowd is pleading with his people, break free of it, leave it. It actually happens to be the first requirement of covenant participation, to walk away from country, to walk away from politics and religion, to walk away from the intermixing of Babel. This is what Dowd is pleading, having seen the horrific marches in the streets and these stupid political and religious platitudes that people by the millions worldwide are now championing the abuse of his people. They broke out and began these protests as a celebration of the carnage of 10/7, one of the most grossly immoral acts and responses in all of human history. So Dowd is pleading with us, break free of that. Do not be part of it. And sadly, Jews, liberal Jews, are a huge part of it. He's pleading with them to cast that away. Pull away those interwoven threads that bind and immobilize. Mizmowr, Psalm 2:3. He who inhabits, establishing his dwelling place in the heavens, holds them in contempt and will ultimately pulverize them. He's speaking of Yahweh, his Father. And he's saying that just because now he is in heaven, the reason he is in heaven and not interacting with the world is that there are too few people who know him. Israel did such a terrific job of being religious and political, they estranged themselves from Yahweh. They even told Yahweh during the Exodus, we don't ever want to hear from you again. We don't ever want to see you again. Yahweh said, okay, I can live with that. You're pretty miserable. And they haven't changed. And so Yahweh, looking down from heaven until his return, and his return with Dowd is less than 9 years off. It will occur on Kippurim, 6:22 p.m. in Jerusalem. on the 2nd of October, 2033. That between now and then he's looking down on the earth and holding those who are screaming on behalf of the rapist, on behalf of those who have engaged in the slave trade, on behalf of those who have sought to annihilate his people, of these mass murderers. He's screaming, I hold you in contempt. And ultimately, I'm going to pulverize you. I am mocking and scoffing at them, lacking any concern over rubbing these enemies out, because Yahweh disrespects them. He then concludes, Yahweh ridicules their foreign behavior and mocks their unfamiliar language. God actually is exceedingly sarcastic. He ridicules, he demeans. The thing that he hates most of all is religion. Second unto that, he despises politics. Therefore, I am anti-religious. Therefore, I am apolitical. And third to those things, the overall propensity of his people to be religious, and those who are religious, their propensity to attack and demean his people, and the politics of the world, which has gone exceedingly dark and demented, and so very far from the truth. The next thing that he hates is the degradation of his son, which is why this psalm was written. And all three of the so-called Abrahamic religions have done that very thing. And so God says, I'm going to do nothing but scoff at you. I'm going to mock you. You're subhuman now. I gave you a conscience, a nasama, for you to discern right from wrong, and it is totally dysfunctional. There is literally nothing I can do other than to mock you. Part of that tells us why Yahweh chose to remove Eliah after fulfilling the great debate between the prophets of religion and politics of Ahab and Jezebel on the political side, and the prophets of Baal the Lord and Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, on the religious side. And he did so brilliantly and sarcastically. Well, the prophet that Yahweh is bringing back as one of the two last witnesses is the ultimate in sarcasm. He is going to attack religion and politics the way Yahweh does, mocking them. He's not going to try to save them. He's going to ridicule them. You know, rabbis are so insistent that Eliah is coming back. They don't even know his name. They call him Elijah. That he is coming back, and they set a place for him at the Passover table. Little did they know, he is going to absolutely tear them to shreds. He despises them. Then this reads in Mizmowr 2:5. Then he will communicate, expressing himself towards them, showing his frustration and resentment, and in his burning indignation, demonstrating his intense hatred and resounding anger, will overwhelm and belittle them. Lots of insights here. These boisterous mobs of religious and political ninwits that are grossly ignorant and immoral, that are marching against his people worldwide. God is saying that I am going to display my resentment, my animosity, my resolute anger, my righteous indignation, demonstrating my intense hatred of them. One of the things that is little known is that because the progressives have been hypocritical, and they say that hate is the worst thing in the world, and if we could just get rid of hate and be intolerant of hate, everything would be wonderful. Well, they're the most hateful people on earth. They're exceedingly hateful. They hate Caucasian men. They must hate all women because they've sided with Islam. They hate the truth. They hate evidence and reason. They certainly hate God. They hate his people because they're openly condemning them to die. And while that is the improper expression of hate and is purely hypocritical in the case of progressives, and hate drives Muslims, they have been conditioned by Muhammad and Allah and their Quran to hate Jews, and there's no way to resolve that. The Quran demeans and denounces Jews. One of these days I will do programs to explain why Islam was created, first and foremost, not just to be a death cult, but to choose Jews as the first people to annihilate. But for now, I'm going to stay on topic and tell you that God hates and that we should follow his example. What we need to know is how to hate and what to hate. We ought to be hating the rapists of 10:7 and the dogma, the religion that motivated them to rape. We ought to hate the torturers and terrorists of 10:7 and know that it was Islam that caused them to act that way. Fundamentalist Islam, not radical Islam, the Islam of Muhammad and Allah and the Quran. We ought to hate mass murder and the religion that has encouraged mass murder for 1400 years and has a legacy of blood running from its inception. We ought to hate pedophiles and rapists because of the damage they do to our children and to women, that rape is actually a terrorist tactic. And understand that Muhammad was a pedophile and he was a rapist. So he inspired that behavior in Muslims because the Quran orders Muslims to follow his example, the example of a rapist and pedophile. This is not my opinion. It's irrefutable fact that he did these things. And so we need to know what to hate and then how to hate. The proper way to hate is not to lash out violently. Don't stoop to their level. Use your words. Shed your ignorance. Know the truth. Read books like Twistianity, the 5 volumes. Read books like Goddamn Religion, the 4,200 pages in those 5 volumes. Read the books of Babel that prove that Judaism is a false religion by undermining the credibility of Ezekiel. Choose to learn the truth and then wield words wisely. And if you do so as part of the covenant family, if you do so speaking for Yahweh, you'll be protected. I have done so now for 23 years. And I do so with a picture of myself and an announcement where I live, because I know that Yahweh protects those who work with him and who serve his people. And you can do the same thing. Learn what to hate and then do so with your words. Yahweh says that his burning indignation will overwhelm and bewilder them when he returns at the end of the 7 years of Israel's troubles on Yom Kippurim with his son. Those who have come to fight against Israel, all of those who are marching in the street. Yeah, we got a triangle. We're wearing a little Pakistani scarves. Yay, Palestine. He's going to obliterate them, which is what they deserve. Now, this is prophetic of what we should expect in year 6,000 Yah. And between now and the build-up to that time. In the fall of 2033, on our Roman pagan calendars, we find God holding those in leadership positions within society accountable, as well as those who have blasted out this message of hate against his people, before sending the religious and political authorities who misled his creation while claiming to represent him off to their eternal incarceration in Sheol. He is going to excoriate them. He's going to denounce them. He's going to ridicule them, as well as their accomplices. So much for the false notion of judge not lest you be judged. We're reminded that those who extol the fear of God will come to tremble before him. Those who commend love without hate will come to experience the nature of righteous indignation. And for those who have worshipped a religious God, they will find the only real God quite bewildering. The first sentence of the first chapter of the first volume of a series of 5 books that I wrote, I've read them too, called Observations. I wrote them, 15 years ago. Now they have been updated many times since that time, most recently within a few months. But that first sentence of the first chapter of the first volume of Observations reads, "Hate is a virtue." This idea is in such discord with modern Moab, who's your daddy? It is likely shocking for most listeners, even though the argument on its behalf was rational and moral and remains so. And yet, throughout our study of Yahweh's testimony, we have been constantly reminded that God not only hates, he is continually teaching us to express our righteous indignation towards those who harm his children and mislead his people through religion and politics, also through conspiracy and militancy. This is but one more example. Like Father, like Son, and so should be every covenant member. Now, what follows could be in Yahweh's voice, but I think it reads more naturally to make the transition where Dode announces it. So while all of 2.6, Psalm 2.6, could reflect Yahweh speaking through his son Dode to us, since the next sentence is unquestionably in Dode's voice, and the criterion is clearly from Yahweh, this is likely Dode's intent. And when I tell you that you can view the speaker from either of the two positions, Yahweh speaking directly to us through Dode's psalm, or Dode expressing Yahweh's intent because he knew him best, the difference is really fairly small because their relationship was closer than any two people, any person, I should say, and God in all of human history. I myself have offered leadership. I have exercised my authority by being a capable leader, pouring out guidance, providing counsel through my governance, providing my advice to consider and respond. Upon Zion, which is the signs posted along the way, my set-apart mountain. There is such a prevalence in social media of those attacking Zions and those claiming to be Zionists. And I don't think there's even 1 in 1,000 of them that knows what Zion means or who it points to. Dode is clearly saying here, I've offered my leadership, providing counsel through my governance upon Zion, my set-apart mountain. What was the set-apart mountain of Dode? Mount Moriah. Where is Zion? It's the ridge line of that mountain from Dode's home, the city of Dode, up that ridge line to Mount Moriah. You might not recognize Mount Moriah because there's 2 hideous Muslim scars on the top of it right now. They will be obliterated. And Dode's home will be reestablished. And not in our very distant future. Instead, very soon, less than 9 years from now. Zion is this ridge line on the mountain of Dode, from the city of Dode to the home for Yahweh's name, on the summit of Mount Moriah, which means to respect Yahweh. And the purpose of Zion is to provide signs that are posted along the way. Those signs are conveying the very things that I'm sharing with you now. To be a Zionist is to be on that ridge line with Dode, accompanied by his father, Yahweh, and proclaiming this message for all to see. Those signs point back to Yahweh and to coming home. The integration of Dode into the lyrics of his own psalm at this point is important because he's telling those living today that he has provided guidance in this regard that we'd be wise to consider. Dode was and is Hamashiach, the anointed by Yahweh, and thus the leader with God's unquestioned and designated authority to provide counsel for humankind to ponder. He was also a prophet, which means his every word that he wrote can be trusted. And there is no question that Dode took these roles seriously, pouring out God's guidance through every word he wrote. To a great extent, it is Dode's lyrics which were inscribed on these signs posted on Mount Zion, on this ridge line between his home and Yahweh's. The great the great narrative that brought Yahweh and I together in terms of understanding his word and his love for his son Dode is 2 Samuel 7, which is a discussion on homes and who builds them and who lives in them. And it is probably the most important prophecy ever written, and probably amongst the top 2 or 3 most misunderstood. But it is there that we learn about the relationship Yahweh has with his people and with his beloved Son, our King. He revealed and then led the way to God through the lyrics of his Psalms, most especially the 19th and the 119th on the Torah, the 22nd and 88th during his fulfillment of the Moed Mikre of Pesach and Matzah and Bakurim in this very same place where he provided the only eyewitness account of what transpired during those days. Zion is much more about Dode even than it is about Yahweh. Both had homes built there, but none were as important for us to appreciate than the Messiah himself. He is the exemplar. He is the one that we should emulate and follow. He was the brightest and most articulate man who ever lived. He was Yahweh's chosen. There may be some who think that it is unseemly for Dode to express himself in this way, as there is no hint of humility in these words. But he is exactly as he ought to be, pridefully and accurately taking credit for his role in bringing man to the covenant through the Torah and for the unique place he earned with God. When we read of the roles that God has asked us to play, for us to poo-poo them because we don't want to come across as self-centered or egotistical actually demeans the intent that God had. If God chooses someone, as he did Dode and to a lesser degree myself, in bringing this message, it is incumbent upon us that we tell you the truth about it. That the declarations that God has made regarding these roles permeate his Torah and his prophets. Our work on Yahweh's behalf and the behalf of his people, our willingness to expound upon what Dode has done, should be important, not only to us, but to those who are listening. And following his example, we should expose and condemn man's ways while sharing Yahweh's words and his way, such that it becomes a source of great satisfaction, not only for us, but of enlightenment for those who listen. God always works through people, and he chooses the people that he wants to communicate through. This man, Dode, was first and foremost. Moshe, second unto him. And there have been many great prophets who have spoken directly for Yahweh. And in these last days, he chose a final witness. Now, I've come to appreciate God's love affair with his son. I've been accused of having a bromance with Dode, and that's just fine with me, recognizing that Dode is not only the one who wrote the lyrics to observe and celebrate the Torah, but that his lives and his lyrics exemplify the Torah's purpose. to right the wrong, to perfect the imperfect. But even I had not considered the full scope of what Yahweh has chosen to give Dowd. The earth, even the entire material realm, the universe, it will all be part of his kingdom. And he's earned it. And he is exceedingly generous. He's the ultimate wise and caring shepherd. And that everything that he has given, he will share with us. Now, that is not to shortchange anyone that part of the covenant is Yah's most beloved child, as the chosen leader of his people, reflecting his father's nature. Dowd will freely share with the rest of the family what has been given to him. He isn't the only child of the covenant. He's just the firstborn. He gets the lion's share as the Lion of Judah, as the man who made it possible for all of us to be there by what he did on Pesach and Matzah and Bikurim. He's earned our respect. He's earned the inheritance he's been given. And we will enjoy an inheritance beyond our imagination as we become part of the covenant. While the earth is big, the universe is bigger still. There are infinitely smaller than our future home in the seventh dimension. So even with the enormity of the universe, with hundreds of billions of galaxies, with hundreds of billions of stars each, and scores of planets and moons in each of them, that is all infinitely, literally infinitely smaller than our future home in the seventh dimension with God. Also, when we come to appreciate the subtleties of the Messiah's earliest revelations, here we're just in the second Mizmowr, we continue to realize that he is also speaking of fulfilling the Moedim, these restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony, the appointments that are known as Mikre, beginning with Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. And the leadership and counsel that he offered on Zion leads to this conclusion, and nothing leads away from it. Now, I appreciate the way Dowd wrote this introduction. He realizes that in spite of all of his flaws, the characteristics which endeared him to Yahweh were his intellect, his passion, his great courage, his confidence, his character. His capacity to reason enabled him to understand and then brilliantly convey the insights derived from the Torah. These attributes earned Dowd the most special place with God, one that is so spectacular. Dowd wants us to know that it was by Father and Son working together that so much was accomplished, pursuant to our life with God going forward. He wrote, I will choose to account for, proclaiming in writing, the decree and the prescription for living of the Almighty, which Yahweh said to me, you are my son. On this day, I bring you forth as your father. Mizmowr 2:7. So here, in just the second Mizmowr song, a set of lyrics written by the chosen one, by the man who was anointed Messiah 3 times, by the man whose Yahweh spirit came upon and never left, by the man that Yahweh chose to be not only the Melech, king of Israel, but the king of the universe as he returns, the man who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. He said that Yahweh will choose to account for, proclaiming in writing, this decree and prescription for living of the Almighty Yahweh, where he said to me, you are my son. On this day, I bring you forth as your father. You have the announcement in the first statement that Dowd is the Mashiach that has been disrespected by the Goyim, even by his own people. And now you read that from Yahweh's perspective, Dowd was his son. Neither of these are conveyed in Judaism. Neither of these are conveyed in Christianity. Neither of these are conveyed in Islam. Neither of these are known by the so-called enlightened progressives. But here in the lyrics of the second psalm, you have absolute affirmation of the very thing I've been trying to share with you, that David is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and that Yahweh's prescription for living by fulfilling the Moed Mikre, particularly Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, provide life. And it's the most important thing for us to know. It is the only cure for the plague of religion and politics. It's the only way to leave this planet alive. And there is no doubt that this is what God said. Heck, religious Jews, rabbis, carry around in their Tanakh this Mizmowr, and yet they don't understand it. They deny it. Christians and their Bibles, which means with Baal, who is the Lord, and Babel to confuse, carry this in the front of the book, that their mess is in the back of the book with them. And yet they can't see that Dode is the Messiah and the Son of God. Heck, and Allah, trying to prove himself, claims that he authored the Mizmowr, although he doesn't know quite how to spell the word. He claims that Dode was a Muslim, although the accounts of him are, well, to say they were stupid would be too kind. The citations on Dode and Solomon were both derived from the idiocy of the Talmud. So I guess we have Muslims to blame for the idiocy of the Quran. Wasn't entirely Muhammad's fault. But here's the Messiah and the Son of God. Let there be no doubt. What I'm telling you is true, and it is irrefutable. He continues, feel free to ask questions about this, seeking to learn the answers, because literally out of me and from me, there will be an inherited share of the land of the Gentile nations that will be given to you and unto successive generations, even into the distant reaches of the earth, perhaps even the entire material realm becoming your property. This recognition that Dode is the Messiah whose acclaim and accomplishments were robbed from him, and that he is the very Son of God, unlocks this opportunity through the covenant to inherit all that Yahweh has to give, the entire earth, even the material realm, by understanding what occurred on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, and how Dode is the exemplar of the Bereth covenant family. What could be more valuable than that? And this is what I'm sharing with you, and sharing it with you for the first time in 3,000 years, so that you might not only understand it, but capitalize upon this great discovery and profound truth. You want to inherit the universe and be part of God's family as a child of Yahweh. You do so through Dode. Recognizing that Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, made us immortal by his sacrifice as the lamb on Pesach, made us appear perfect before God by carrying our guilt with his soul into Sheol and depositing it there on Matzah, unyeasting our souls of the corruption of religion and politics, so that we could be adopted along with the firstborn, signing our adoption papers on Bakurim to enable God to enrich and empower us, is the means to this inheritance. And we actually get to rise up to God, becoming spiritual beings as light, a river of light going to leave the earth on Shabuah. Less than a year and a half from now, May 22nd, 2026, as the covenant family comprised of Yehudim and Goyim are transformed and harvested literally as souls by God. This is what he's offering. Dode wrote the second Mizmowr psalm so that this was all said of him. God's perspective on this, and it's the only one that matters in this regard. Dode is Yahweh's Messiah. He is Yahweh's son. Dode has a father that matters. The father that matters is Yahweh. And as Yahweh's most beloved, his firstborn, Dode will be receiving the lion's share of his father's inheritance. This also explains why, upon Yahweh's return, the kingdom of Dode will be reestablished, not a democracy in Israel. But it goes far deeper than this, because it was only Yahweh's Bechor, firstborn, who could properly experience the Mikra Bechurim, following the fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah. Collectively, these Moedim, these restoring witnesses, provide Yahweh's prescription for living. And in this case, by serving as the sacrificial soul during Chag Matzah, Dode was in a position to offer his people an inheritance from God. And this is why I wanted you to be aware of how this was written, so that you might be in recognition of what Yahweh is offering through his Son, and to recognize that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, and the Passover Lamb, as well as our Savior through Matzah. Let's celebrate his sacrifice. The time is nigh to disregard all of the frauds, all of the counterfeits, and accept the truth. As is the case elsewhere, the second Mizmowr song, we find irrefutable proof that Dode David is the Son of God. He is Yahweh's Messiah. And just as it is presented in Yeshaya Isaiah 9, it is Yahweh who is offering his Son to us as a gift. Further, when we look back to the previous statement, this day is directed toward what occurred when Dode led the way home on Zion as he fulfilled the Mikra. In fact, the very reason Yahweh made this declaration this way, saying, I will bring you forth as your father assisting you, is so that we would come to appreciate how these Psalms and Yeshaya Isaiah's prophecies work together hand in glove. One explains the other, and together they form the perfect picture. This proclamation was also made so that we could confidently trust everything Dode has to say about Yahweh, his Torah and covenant, about Yahudah, about Yisrael, and most especially about the Mikra. He knows what it means to be observant and to understand what God is offering and expects in return. Further, when we understand the kind of familial relationship Yah and Dode experienced, we now know that we too can come to enjoy the same kind of father and son bond that Dode established with God. This day that Yahweh is bringing forth his Son is prophetic, just like the rest of the second Mizmowr psalm, of his not only second coming, but his third coming, of the fulfillment of Bechurim and then Kippurim. It wasn't just Dode's work as a songwriter, but as a savior and future king. Yahweh is affirming that he is bringing his Son, his Ben, and his Mashiach, Messiah, forth to fulfill Chag Matzah and his Melech, king, to reign over and defend Yisrael, beginning on Kippurim. Therefore, the realization that a second and third coming are true when applied to the right Mashiach and Ben, Son of God, should resonate within you. You now know the truth. Will you capitalize upon it? Will you go to yadayah.com and read the books on the shelf so that you have absolute affirmation that not only is this the second Mizmowr being presented to you and translated correctly, but that this same message is proclaimed throughout the Torah and prophets. Now, coming back down to earth from this elevated thought and lofty position, it is telling with respect to living with God and pleasing Him. We are reminded that Dowd was unabashedly critical of those who were wrong about Yahweh and wrong about Him. It's one thing to have made the sacrifice and to let the Romans rip the skin from His body and then execute Him in the most painful way through crucifixion. And then for Him to carry our guilt into hell, into Sheol, to perfect us. But it's another thing altogether to have His people spit at Him and deny Him and to replace Him and to create the buffoonery of a Star of David as opposed to recognizing He is the Messiah. He is our King. He is the Son of God, which they deny. He is our Savior. And yet all of that was renounced, and it's been renounced in all three of these so-called Abrahamic religions. And Dowd is unabashedly critical of all of them. Perhaps we should be as well. It's appropriate, even desirable, for us to expose and condemn those in leadership positions who continue to lead many astray. Now, fundamentally, sha'al, used in this context, means to question, to inquire about, to look, and to search for answers. Therefore, Yahweh isn't telling Dowd to make this request of him, but instead, He is encouraging him, and therefore us, to choose to inquire about the reasons God is doing all of this with Dowd. The overriding theme of Yahweh's discussions with Abraham focused upon the nakala, the inheritance God intended to give him. And as we know, Abraham's inheritance, one that would be passed to successive generations through Yishak and Jacob, and thus to Dowd, was the land of Yisrael, of Israel. Albeit the territory Dowd would come to control was much larger. It included the ancient kingdoms whose modern manifestations play a significant role in tomorrow's prophetic fulfillments, although in a very horrible way. These include Moab, which is indicative of Pauline Christianity and multicultural socialist secular humanism, Edom, representing Roman Catholicism, and Europe and Ammon, which depicts Islam, among with portions of the Pelesheh, these Fakistinians who are pretending to be Palestinians, as well as Aram, Syria, which is now infested and controlled by Islamic jihadists. This actually affirms something we learned while dissecting every word Yahweh shared with Abraham. Remember when Abraham broke down and complained, saying that he didn't understand the purpose or the nature of the inheritance Yahweh was offering because he didn't have an heir? Well, God took him into the spiritual realm, not around the earth, and then He revealed the benefits of being transformed into light. In other words, Abraham's inheritance in the covenant was to become perfected and eternal, empowered, enriched, and enlightened. It would be God's work with His son, Dowd, that would make it so. To a lesser degree, Yahweh was announcing this on Dowd's behalf so that we'd understand a prophecy He would make through Zechariah, centuries later. And because I don't want these programs to be burdensomely long, I will turn back to this conclusion of our analysis of the second Mizmowr and hopefully move into the third as we return to our review of the first volume of Coming Home on the Yahowah blog. My name is Craig Wynn.